Hello,
Morning,
everybody.
everybody. So nice
Thank you
to
all.
see so many of you today. We're really, really happy that you're with us. We're going to give people a couple of minutes. We've got people who are still joining us for the conversation. But in the meantime, while we're waiting for them, I'll just let you know we've got a wonderful group of colleagues here together to talk with you this morning, to take all of your questions. And I'll give you a little bit of a rundown of, how this will work. We'll take a couple of minutes just, to talk about the journalism school, and then our faculty panel, Professors Elena Cabral, Duy Linh Tu, Marguerite Holloway, will talk with you a little bit about each of their sort of specialization areas. They'll talk a little bit about how they came to become journalists and how they approach journalism, how they approach their teaching. They will talk for about 10, maybe 15 minutes, and then we'll stop there and take questions from you for the faculty members, just so that you know that, because one or two of them may have to leave and may have to leave before the Q&A that we will have at the very end of the program from 1 to 1:30. And then after our faculty panel, we have two alumni of programs here with us, Muriel Alarcon. Muriel, if you want to just wave. Muriel is a graduate of the MA Science program, and we also have Laila Hassan. Laila, where are you?
Lila will be here at 12:20.
Got it. Laila will be here shortly then. And they will just talk with you about, their experiences as a student here at the journalism school. Then from 12:45 to 1 o'clock, my colleague Gina Boubian, Gina, there you are. Gina Boubian will be talking with you about career services, about our career expo, about anything that you would like to hear about regarding the job market in journalism. And then once Gina has finished, then we will stop and take questions from everybody. We're also not going to talk a whole lot about the admission process or the scholarship process, other than to say that the admissions application is open. If you go to the website, you'll be able to access it directly. The application instructions are right there on the website. We have a separate scholarship application, which is not yet available, but which will become available in December, and we will notify everybody who is a prospective student or an applicant already to open that up and file it. And we will also have separate sessions after this one to talk further about the application process and to answer specific questions that you have about that. So I'm going to take a quick minute then to introduce all of my colleagues who are here with me so far. And I am Christine Souders. I'm the Associate Dean of Admission and Financial Aid. Ross Yelsey, our Assistant Director. John Graham, Assistant Director. Marguerite Holloway, and I'm kind of going across the top of these photographs. Marguerite Holloway, Professor and Director of the MA Science program. My colleague David Hooker, who is the manager for the Admissions and Financial Aid Office. My colleague Taryn Almanzar, our Assistant Dean for Financial Aid and Admission. Muriel, you've already been introduced to. Duy Linh Tu, Professor Duy Linh Tu, faculty member in the MS program and in the video documentaries. Elena Cabral, who is the director of the part-time MS program, and Gina Boubian, who is, there she is waving, again, career services, and also my colleague, Edwin Isaac. Edwin Edwin is our financial aid guru, especially federal financial aid. Edwin is our Associate Director of Financial Aid and Admission. So I'm gonna go ahead and ask our faculty panel to begin. And Elena, I'm gonna ask you to start first, just to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself, and a little bit more then also about the Master of Science program.
Okay. So as Christine said, I'm the director of the part-time program. I'm also a graduate of the part-time program. After graduating in 99, I went on to work for the Miami Herald, first Newsday, then the Miami Herald, and then did some magazine work. I worked at Scholastic as an editor for their magazine division, and I've taught a number of classes here. I also worked in career services for 10 years and currently run communications in our international programs here at the Journalism School, which I'm happy to talk to you about. And you might want to check out some of the dates for information sessions regarding those dual degree programs. So the Master of Science program is one that has evolved in many ways over the 100 years that this institution has been around, and is still evolving. You know, I was thinking that I was just recalling that we used to have these concentrations: print, magazine or newspaper, magazine, and then what was referred to as new media back in the day. And to a certain extent, that moniker of new media is still something we have, in the sense that journalism is evolving and changing. And I think this institution, better than anyone, has stayed on that cutting edge, particularly in the area of data journalism and computational science. But in other ways, the institution has remained very much an institution that embraces and espouses the general standards of journalism that remain very important today, and that are concentrated in what I would refer to as our core curriculum, our reporting and writing class that every student takes in their first semester. And what we've learned is that even when you are a recent graduate, who's never taken any journalism classes or worked in a newsroom, or you're someone with 15 years of experience, those two core classes will raise your game. Whether it's getting rid of a lot of the grammatical mistakes we've been making since 5th grade, to really understanding the idea of verification of facts and how to extract them in an interview. And how to do a public records request, but then also how to use the internet more efficiently in order to research a story, and particularly in this era of social distancing, how to use social media as a way to report everything from protests to crowds gathered outside of Walter Reed Medical Center, as we were watching last night. And then certainly how to form the habits of mind of a journalist. I always like to joke that it was really the hard deadlines of reporting that taught me to never be late for anything, because there are no do-overs in journalism. They don't repeat, sentencing or shuttle launches for journalists who show up late. And so a lot of those fundamental classes are about putting those traits into place, enforcing them and reinforcing them, but also having discussions openly with students about how journalism is also changing in a lot of ways, particularly under this administration, how Black Lives Matter has changed the way journalists think about objectivity, for example. Those are ongoing conversations that we like to foster as well. After the fundamental core classes in the MS program, there's as I said, no longer concentrations per se, except if you're a documentary student or a Stabile student, or you're a computational science dual degree student. In those instances, yes, you're taking some additional coursework. But in general, MS students can really create their own curriculum over the course of the 10 months or the 5 semesters / 2 years that part-timers do this program. And they do that by choosing classes, for example, in a category called Image and Sound, in which you can choose between audio, for those of you who are really into podcasts, video, photography, or data. And by doing so, you then create sort of a prerequisite for some of our other classes that come afterward in the spring, that are more intense in subject areas, such as covering education. Marguerite teaches a wonderful science reporting class for MS students as well, right, Marguerite? You still teach that for MS students? Okay. And so you can focus in subject areas, but you can also focus on platforms, working in the area of podcasting, or in Duy's multimedia storytelling class, having gained some of the fundamental skills. And he's still going to give you a ton more, but those classes will expect that you have the basics down so that they can then advance to the really more sophisticated storytelling, Then, students take a master's project, and by and large, they do a long form print magazine piece. And I wouldn't say print really either, because a lot of these get sold to digital platforms and the like. One of our students completed a master's project this summer about how the AIDS epidemic informed the way that we are addressing coronavirus. And he did it by focusing on a singular figure largely, and had this very ambitious goal of interviewing Anthony Fauci. Now, I think a ton of us on the faculty would say, forget it, he's never going to talk to you. Well, guess what? He sort of cornered Fauci during a lunch break, having a slice of pizza, and had a really wonderful conversation with him about his relationship to an iconic AIDS activist, Larry Kramer, who died in May of pneumonia, and their very unlikely friendship. And it was a very personal, really, unique interview, which he sold to NBC. So it was just sort of one piece of his master's project, but nevertheless, a really terrific. And then where did it go? And went on a broadcast website. So you can see how the sort of fluid world of journalism, in terms of how platforms exchange and partner with each other, is echoed in our curriculum, in the sense that you can really train yourself through these courses to become the kind of journalist who can work across platforms, who can, put a recorder on and know how to do a podcast to accompany a long form investigations piece. And, you can choose to do that in 10 months, like a lot of our full-timers do. Or you can, if you happen to work and live in the New York City area, do it over the course of 2 years, 1 semester at a time. Sometimes that appeals to students who are career changers and sort of want to pace themselves. I'm a big proponent of the part-time program, because I feel like it's a wonderful thing to go back to school and have all the perks and privileges that we took for granted as undergraduates, and be able to use that to steer ourselves into a career. So either way, it works great for our students. And as you know, this is a wonderful time to enter this profession. It's more important than ever. Our students are getting really excited and ready to cover this election. But as you also may know by now, that story is not going to end on November 3rd. And coming next year will be just as important to have a team of really well-trained journalists going into the field.
Great. Thank you very much, Elena. Duy, would you talk with us a little bit about yourself, about multimedia journalism at Columbia, and about the visual craft track as well?
Sure. So like Elena, I was also class of 99. I always forget that. And
You're not supposed to tell them the year.
yeah. And
or did I do that?
Wait, you already did. And I still have our yearbooks. I still have your photo in there, and we were looking extra special in the 90s, I'll tell you that. So I graduated from the program, and and when I originally went into the program, like I said, in the late 90s, there were these concentrations: newspaper, magazine, broadcast, which was TV or radio. I don't even know if new media was there yet. Maybe it was, you're right. So and I was going to be a magazine writer, and I remember coming in, and there was this open house, very much like this, but in like the real world. There was an open house, and this professor at the time, who has passed away, David Claytel, friend, mentor of mine, he gave this kind of information session, and he talked about the power of the moving image. And I immediately ran down to the dean's office and said, I don't want to be magazine anymore. I want to be whatever this guy's serving up, right? And so so I think it was accidental, like the whole thing. Like I still think to this day, had I slept in that day, I never would have heard that speech, and who knows where I'd be, right? And so the cool thing now, as Elena said, is you don't have to make those decisions so early on, right? We used to have a course called reporting and writing, because it was so married, like reporting was so married to the act of being a print reporter, right? Which it still can be. You can still come here and do all those wonderful things. But now it's just called reporting, in the sense that everyone is going to get that kind of fundamental training. And then you get the sampling of, writing and data and investigative techniques, and multimedia, if you want, podcasting, broadcast style video, whatever the case may be. So I came in and I spent a year there, and I went off and I worked at Network News. And then at the same time, it was the early 2000s. So this whole web thing was happening for the first time. The first web kind of videos were popping up. So I got a job at a .com. This is when, that was not a thing. It was almost embarrassing to work at a .com, because at the time, if you graduated Columbia, your goal was like New York Times or CNN or ABC. You were not going to like random.com. But that's what I did, because I worked at ABC and I had my fill of that. And so I decided to do that. And then that led me to making short films online that no one saw, because no one had broadband back then. But that was okay, because I got to make a lot of mistakes in private, right, I guess. And then I started making films, and there's where I am. And so same professor who inspired me called me up one day. And it's like, hey, do you do this internet stuff? I remember David Claytel pulled me into his office. He was the dean then. He's like, you do this internet stuff? And I was like, yeah, I guess it's called internet stuff, right? This was early days. And he said, we should probably have an internet stuff class here, right? And he said, did you ever want to teach? It's like, I never dreamt of teaching, but I'll do it, because I guess I could, like, I got to pay rent, right? And so, because I'll tell you, there's not a whole lot of money in bad video makers early on in their careers. So I decided to do it, and he teamed me up with this other professor, and we were supposed to co-teach, but the professor on the first day was like, you got this? I'm like, what do you mean you got this? And so he just kind of threw me in the deep end, and then I fell in love with teaching. And so that's I guess that's a long way of saying everything was accidental for me. And but I think I never knew what journalism was, really. I think even still to this day, a lot of students who come in who don't have an exact defined definition of journalism in their head, which is fine, because that's the I think the great thing about the program now versus when I went, was like there's a lot more flexibility to experiment and taste and develop your taste and develop what you like and go in the directions that you like. But it was really accidental where I am. And I think that 20 some odd years later, it's exciting to see the possibilities for what the students can do. Because I'll tell you, my first gig out of J school, I worked at ABC News in London. I think I worked there for 6 months, and I got like 20 seconds on air. Like that was my body of work, 20 seconds. And the reason, it wasn't like I didn't show up to work every day. It's like, there's a hierarchy, right? There's like the producers pitch the stories, and better people get the stuff published, and you just do your thing. But now the exciting thing is, like, our recent graduates go out and do real stuff. And so and that's related to the training. And I'll make this quick, because I want to hear from Marguerite as well, is that people often ask me, is it worth it to come, right? Is it worth it? I mean, that's such a weird question, right? That's such a personal answer. But I think it's easier for me to sell the program to someone than it would have been 20 years ago. Because 20 years ago, I didn't have to go to J school. I could have gone to work in any kind of newspaper or worked my way up. There would have been some like mean editor that would have edited my work and like, you know, made me feel bad, but I would have gotten better, right? Unfortunately, our industry is constricted so much that those wonderfully grisly old editors aren't there anymore in many places, and they're not there to give you the mentorship and the kind of editing that you need. So these days, I have no problems, you know, saying that J-School is worth it if you really want it, right? It's really worth it because it gives you probably, you know, it's a year program, but if I'm going to be honest, it's probably giving you like 4 years worth of experience in terms of the rigorous editing and identifying stories. And so when I went, I didn't have to, right? It was like kind of a shortcut. But I think now it's not just a shortcut, it's mandatory training. And I'm glad to talk more about that, but I want to hand it on to my colleagues to say more about their stuff.
Thank you, Du. Marguerite?
So like Elena and Du, I'm also a graduate of the MS program, but I'm way older than them. So I graduated in '88. I have no problem saying what year it was. And at that time, there were specializations in subject areas, and sort of similar to what Du described. I had this life-changing experience when I came to the journalism school because I was a comp lit major. I wanted to write about arts and culture. And I ended up in a reporting class with Ken Goldstein, who was a professor of science journalism. And I suddenly discovered, writing for him, that the things that really engaged me and really pissed me off were environmental stories and public health stories. And so I really did a pivot and left the journalism school very focused on reporting on science and environment. And I spent most of my career at Scientific American. And then also similar to Du's experience, when David Claytell called him back, Ken Goldstein was retiring and called me back. I had never thought about teaching before, and then fell in love with it as well. So I teach in both the MS program and the MA program. And Du and I actually teach jointly sometimes in the MS. We teach multimedia and science, environment, climate. But I'm going to talk right now about the MA a little bit, and then I'm very happy to answer questions further into the session about courses in the MS too, and of course further about the MA. But the MA was started basically around 2005, and the idea was that we really needed a program that could exist for experienced journalists. And what constitutes experience is sort of depends very much on the individual, but the idea was that someone could come back to school after practicing journalism for a while and specialize in an area that perhaps they didn't know very well, or perhaps they wanted to go deep in. And so we came up with 4 tracks: arts and culture, business and economics, government and politics, and science and environment and medicine. We never know what to call science because it's like science, environment, medicine, health, etc., climate. But basically we just put it all under the umbrella of science. And the program, I'm going to describe science a little bit, but it's the pattern is similar across all 4 of the disciplines. Basically, it's anchored by a core seminar that runs all year long and that is co-taught by scientists. So in the first semester, we meet twice a week. Once it's just us, the journalists, and once it's with an expert. And we're in the climate segment right now. We have an incredible climate scientist named Gisela Winkler. And I'm so glad Muriel is on this panel because she can maybe talk a little bit about some of these guests. But we spend a lot of time on climate and ecology in the fall. We do some physics, and increasingly we're doing AI and technology, and sort of looking at because a lot of climate going forward is going to be about fixes or trying to find fixes, and sort of the idea of sort of techno-optimism and what technology can and can't do for us, I think is becoming increasingly important thread in the seminar. And then in the spring, we do sort of more health, science, neuroscience, public health. And in addition to this core seminar that all the specializations share, there is a course called Evidence and Inference, where you sort of look at how journalists approach things differently than anthropologists or sociologists or oral historians. And then the students take outside courses around the university in their area of specialization. Right now, one of my students is taking a forest ecology class. 2 are taking food ecology classes. Muriel took a death and dying narrative medicine class. It can range sort of from history, sociology to hard sciences. And the other thing that is distinctive about and Ross, just wave at me if I'm going on too long. Yes? No? Okay. The other thing that's distinctive about the MA is that unlike the master's project, which is slightly shorter, even though it's a big, capstone work in the MS program, in the MA, you have another like month or so, and it's longer. And it's about 8,000 words. And it's a real opportunity, whether you get it published or not, to really go deep and to really think with nuance and complexity and hopefully with some creativity about narrative. I think that's it. I could talk about one of the questions, Ross, you asked me to think about was like, who's a good candidate, but maybe we'll get to that later on. And I know I spoke very fast, and I'm happy to answer any questions to fill in any details.
Christine, you're muted there.
Thank you, Marguerite. I'm going to turn things over now to John Graham, who has been kind of watching all of your questions as they've been coming in. And so he is going to pass these questions around to the faculty for some responses.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Christine, and thank you all so much for coming today. So actually, Marguerite, I am going to ask you a little bit more about that, just because, so many people, especially younger journalists who may have, a little less experience than some of the more seasoned journalists who are in MA, they're really interested in doing a lot of this subject-related reporting, especially something like science, arts and culture, things like that, politics. They're so ubiquitous right now, and they're so present in our lives. What is the kind of journalistic experience that you're looking for from an applicant who's applying to the MA program? What sets them apart from somebody who may not be qualified for the M program?
So we're not teaching sort of basic journalism skills. We assume that you know how to report, maybe not necessarily in nuanced and maybe more layered ways in the discipline that you've applied to or that you're studying in, but we assume that you know the basics. We assume you know the basics of journalistic ethics, practice, and we assume that you know how to write a story. We don't assume that you know how to write a long narrative like the thesis. That's usually the first time anyone is encountered doing something at that scale. But so we're looking for people who have some experience, and we've said at various times, like maybe about 5 years experience. What we find when we read through the applications is that sometimes it can be people who have a lot more than that. We've had people in the program who have more experience and are sort of slightly further along in their careers than I am. And we've had people who are just out of undergrad. And it's really about the way they think. It's about whether there is a sort of analytical cast to the way they see the world, a desire, a great curiosity that comes across. And even if they're not hugely experienced, that they really understand what journalism is and that they can express that in their applications or, in conversations with me and my colleague, Jonathan Weiner, who teaches the other half of the year. So by and large, people have about 5+ years, but there are times, and this year is a good example, we have several people who have not been out of undergrad very long. One has transitioned right from undergrad, and it's because of their thinking and the questions and their creativity and we can see that at play in their applications. Does that answer?
Absolutely. Thank you, Marguerite. I'm just going to take a couple more questions because I know we're going to speak with our alums. Some of these are kind of logistical questions. So a student asked if you could be considered for both the full-time and the part-time. In order to apply, you do need to pick one, but you can also switch. I'll actually let Elena kind of speak to a little bit about what the part-time program is, how it's different in a slight way, and if it's recommended to apply to the part-time program if somebody doesn't have like a full-time job.
Oh, right. Yes, we do sometimes get people who think that they can move from, Washington State to New York City and then do our part-time program while finding a job somewhere. And I'm always very nervous about that because that's a big gamble. I think that anybody who moves to New York City, as I did when I was a teenager, always underestimates the cost of living in New York. And so it's ideal for people who are already here and know their way around to do the part-time program because they've already sort of anchored some of their essentials, in terms of their life here in New York City. But it does happen from time to time that students just prefer. Sometimes they have, professions in the service industry and bartending and waitressing, and they transfer that pretty easily to New York City and they make it work. But I think it's a very personal decision based on your goals. I still to this day am in awe at the idea of getting a master's degree in 10 months and then shooting into the industry, pretty quickly and successfully, as many of our part-timers do, just right out of school, getting into jobs that are not necessarily well, even if they're internships, they're not like the internships you had when you were an undergraduate. And Gina Boubian will explain a little further about what that means. But yes, occasionally when students do apply for full-time and part-time, they may make a decision because something may change between the time that they apply and are accepted and the time that they are meant to start. Both cohorts start now in September, or just slightly before in August for some training, that they need to switch. And so there is a process of notifying myself first, really to talk about it, and then officially putting themselves on a list in the admissions office, so that we give everyone who we've made an offer to the chance to say yes or no. And then we sort of make a switch, with those students. And, by some miracle, or, more likely the very hard work of the admissions office, it works out. So I would echo John's advice to think about what you want first, check the box. And if something changes in your life, let us know sooner rather than later.
Thank you so much. A lot of these questions are logistical and things that the admissions office will really be able to answer in that last half hour of our session. But I know that we have some of our alums who are actually on deadline right now, as many of you will be when you when you get into the field of journalism. So I think I'm going to let Ross segue into that, and we'll begin hearing from our alums.
Thanks, John. So as Christine mentioned, we're really pleased to have two alums who just graduated in May 2020 in our conversation today. We have Leila Hassan, who's a graduate of the Master of Science Tabeel specialization, and Muriel Alarcon, who studied with Professor Holloway in the MA Science concentration. And I think since I know Leila's on deadline right now, we can start with her. And I'll ask Leila just to tell us a little bit about what you're doing now. You don't have to tell us what you're reporting on at the moment, but what you're doing as a job right now, and then what inspired you to come to Columbia, and if you have a few highlights from your experience you'd like to share with the audience, that would be great.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ross, and thank you for inviting me here today. I'm really humbled that you chose me out of the incredible class that we had that graduated during the pandemic. So currently I'm one of Columbia's 2 fellows at Frontline Pbs. And what the job looks like is working on the digital team to support content for films that go out. I'm sure you're all familiar with Frontline being famous for their documentaries. But the job also includes me working on the documentaries themselves, providing fact-checking research, and there's an extra project called the Transparency Project, where we release the footage and interviews that we use during these films to make a more inclusive and engaging, transparent process when releasing our journalism. And so I'm the one on deadline now because we have to do that by Monday. But that's sort of what I'm looking at now. Columbia offers its fellowships to 2 students from the entire school every year. And, you know, that in addition to all the other opportunities offered to Columbia students only is, you know, one of the best reasons why I chose Columbia in the first place. But other reasons why I chose Columbia was, prior to me joining Columbia, I was working at Human Rights Watch, which is a global NGO that focuses on investigations of human rights abuses around the world. It's very investigative in nature, requires a lot of research, a lot of interviews, a lot of communications with authorities and officials, but is still within the realm of advocacy and NGO. And so one of the reasons why I applied to Columbia Journalism School is because while I might have had the skills, I didn't have the formal training in journalism that sort of allowed me to explore the field more confidently and apply for different things. So that's one of the reasons why I chose Columbia, you know, simply to solidify my ability in journalism and to improve my craft, but also to the Stabile Investigative Program, which is a very selective program for those that are interested in doing long form, more intense investigations than just, you know, features and hard news and whatnot. It really focuses on your ability to uncover truths, to uncover wrongdoing, and to engage with actors of all levels of society. And so if I had to go back and think about memories and highlights from my time there, you know, I think Stabile is definitely one of the highest, because it's a year-long training in one class of investigative work. You meet with the same cohort and the same teachers, professors all year long, every single week, and you really begin to form a cohort, a family, and you have like a group of 4 professors. I remember we had 4 every single week that you can turn to for advice, for their expertise, and to really feel like you're being supported. But besides Stabile, I think another highlight of mine would also be getting to know the faculty and getting to know the other students. You know, already there are people from my class that are in positions to hire other people based on where they are, by making recommendations and by, you know, getting people's names in the door and whatever. So I think one of the highlights has really come to fruition after I've graduated in my cohort.
Great, thank you so much, Leila. And so I'll pass it over to Muriel now, and Muriel will ask you something similar about what you're currently doing and what inspired you. I know Marguerite talked a little bit about, you know, what is a good fit for, you know, the MA program. Who's the right fit for that? What made you decide that was the right next step for you in your career? And what are some of your highlights from the concentration seminar and from the program in general?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you so much for the invitation. I feel so honored to be part of this panel. I'm very excited about the chance to share with you my experience as an MA student in this very unique time. Well, first, I am a Chilean journalist, and before coming here, I used to work as a reporter for El Mercurio newspaper, one of the most important Chilean newspapers. And I was also a professor in charge of a writing workshop at the Universidad Católica Journalism School. Well, although I loved what I was doing very much, I really felt the need to challenge myself and to pursue a specific field such, well, as science for the first time in my career. I really felt that I wanted to gain a global perspective and that I really wanted to take my talent to another level. And well, in my previous experience in the city, I always had felt that in New York, I was gonna be closer to the world. So well, and I remember exactly the moment when I first met Marguerite. This was 1 year before I decided to take the science concentration. And I remember saying to her, I don't have any science background. I don't know anything about it. And she answered something that I never forgot, that science was definitely broader than I thought. And although I still don't feel really confident about my definition about science, I really think that is a very good sign because it is definitely a bigger field than I thought before coming here. Well, I also knew that I had to let myself be surprised by science. And I remember that particularly during my experience in the MA, I always was being pushed by Marguerite to go beyond my comfort zone and took, for example, the neuroscience class. It was later, I could say, one of the best decisions I could have ever taken, I remember being later fascinated, and well, also Marguerite can assure also this, a little obsessed about the possibility of thinking of the effect that the quarantine had on our brains. Well, and as also Marguerite said, I also took from the Colombia Narrative Medicine program the death class, and other one, the embodiment class, the embodiment class, I say, which it's sort of a medical approach that values the patient's narratives in their medical treatment. Well, these are just two examples of all the new worlds I started to see closer to me after cursing the science concentration. And I would say that the experience definitely broadened my horizon of possible stories, and obviously the way in which I could tell them. And well, finally, today I am an investigative journalist at the Global Migration Project from Columbia Journalism School. I have today the chance to work with another great graduate student from the program in a long-form story about gender and migration during 6 months. So to me, this has been the perfect chance to put in practice not just the investigative techniques and reporting skills that I learned during this last year, but also what I learned in terms of this sort of sophisticated storytelling that was already mentioned.
Great, thank you. John, do we have any questions for the alumni at this point? I think you're muted there.
John.
Here I am, I'm doing it too. We don't. We've been having a lot of like logistical questions about future webinars and the differences between the programs. So we'll be addressing a lot of those at last half hour.
I have a question then for you both. For people who are watching this and thinking about putting together an application for this season, do you have any tips for potential applicants in terms of how to best approach their application to Columbia? Oh, I think you're both muted if anybody wants to start.
For those, I'll go first just because I can do MS and Stabile separately because Stabile is a separate application. So to get it, you might be admitted to the MS program, but not necessarily to Stabile. So even if you don't get admitted to Stabile, you'll still get into the MS program. But if you want to get into Stabile, that extra additional essay that you write for Stabile really forces you to think about why you're qualified to do investigative work and what in your experience demonstrates that you are either interested or able to conduct long-form investigations. You know, is your strength in interviewing? Are you good with research? Are you good with data? Part of my application, you know, even though I had been out of college for a while, part of my application discussed how I came from political science background and how a lot of that requires deep research and theory debunking, statistics, deep reading and interviewing. And so really think about whatever you've done in the past, whether it was journalism, like strict journalism or not, and deduct from that the skills that investigative journalists would use, and really, really hone that in, regardless of whatever you were doing before. If you were in marketing, if you were in the NGO world like me, like there's something in your profession, I think, that you can always twist into being journalistic. So think about that for Stabile. But for the general MS program, you have to sell yourself as a person. There's a personal essay, and then there's a professional essay. So separate where your aspirations are and where your professional trajectory is going, and write those two separate essays. And I hope that's as useful as it can be. You know, I got really personal in my personal essay, but my professional essay, you know, read almost like a cover letter. So, you know, it really depends on whatever you're doing, but follow the instructions and keep up with the news, because when you take the quiz in January, I think, if they're doing that, you're going to want to have known all the highlights, which is really tough for 2020, but good luck.
Thanks. And Leela's referencing our writing test, which we offer in an online proctored form for people applying to the MS programs, which we'll have offered for people who are applying. You'll get a link to do that when you have a convenient time. And it usually asks you to talk about a few scenarios and reporting. And it's probably good, as she's saying, to know more about what's going on in the news, which is hard not to know about these days, I think.
Yeah, I want to add something about, I agree completely with Leela, but also what I would advise you to you is to have clear who you are, and to never forget the value of who you are and what is your, for example, in my case, the cultural background. You know, I am Chilean, but also I am Latina. And I think this was super important to me when I applied to my fellowship, and then earlier to the Master of Arts. And I would say, for example, during the master, the different experience reporting doing these exercises made me always aware of the need of more Latino voices in the U.S. coverage of science and health. So, and also, I would say that this, right, not just with this application, but today in the very unique times we are experiencing, will always open you doors. For example, in my current job, I feel I can also shine a light on those stories. And if I'm not wrong, this was part of also my application. What can I bring with me into the class? And I think that it's a conversation you can have with yourself before even starting to write who you are, what can you bring, what is the career you have been designing till now, and why you feel the need, the call to came here. What can this experience bring to you?
Excellent. I have two quick questions. I'm so sorry. And Lila, I know you have to go soon. I'm going to ask you first. You know, a lot of students are asking about your curriculum and your master's project. Can you talk about some of the classes that you selected for yourself, both in the fall and the spring? And how did you come about choosing your master's project? And did your coursework kind of help you in kind of navigating in a certain direction?
Yeah, no, that's a really sweet question. When you're applying for the program, they ask you to propose investigative stories, but don't feel married to them because nobody expects, you know, a 100% flawless application with the master's project idea. You'll find that as the year goes by, your story minimizes and minimizes and minimizes to being something doable, but also that it changes with the reporting as every other story in the world does. So my coursework, everyone in the MS program is required to take a couple of weeks long reporting boot camp in which different people get different beats. My beat had happened to have been a geographic one in the Bronx and a specific area and zip code in the Bronx. And so as I was doing very intense reporting, you know, being there almost every single day, I was introduced to characters that, you know, told me about issues that were happening in their local area. And, you know, within it turned out to be a very, an investigative story in which I was uncovering unethical but also discriminatory practices of parents that were pulling their children out of school. So I, you know, spent the entire year working on that. At first, it was supposed to be entirely New York City focused, but as the year goes by and you become more adept to doing investigations and getting a lot more guidance on what you're doing, it minimizes into something smaller. And so mine ended up being the Bronx, and it's still a work in progress. So I'm sorry about being vague, but like hopefully you'll get my master's project published sometime soon, and I'll send it to all of you, which is also another perk of the program where the professors work with you well after you graduate to like really ensure that the work that you did for an entire year doesn't like sit on a hard drive, but like actually gets pitched and published somewhere. And so you'll get mine soon. But anyway, some other coursework that I had taken throughout the year was video documentary. So, you know, for those that are interested in different mediums and feel as if they're going to go into an investigative track, not being able to engage in other forms of storytelling, that's not the case at all. I loved my documentary class. I had the option of continuing that into the spring, but opted in for another coursework instead about gender and immigration and conflict reporting. And so for my conflict reporting class, it was very much long form investigative preparation to do stories in conflict zones. So my country was Iraq, other people's countries could have been Somalia, Afghanistan, Mexico, Egypt, Yemen, what have you. And basically we spent the entire semester proposing, researching, planning, and coming up actually with a grant pitch for a potential story in one of these countries. And at the end of the semester, actually, we're able to cold pitch that to the head of the Pulitzer Grant Center, which if you're not familiar with, familiarize yourselves with. So that's definitely one of my highlights, being able to think, you know, plan ahead to working on a country, especially for those that are interested in international news. And I think that also led towards me working with that professor during the summer before I started Frontline. So there were a lot of highlights from this year. Like, it's really hard for me to just pick one, but I hope that kind of answers the question.
That's fantastic. Yes, thank you, Lila. Muriel, I had a question for you. A student asked, how does the experience of, covering news in New York, doing the work that you did at Columbia, how will that change the way you approach journalism in Chile?
How will it change? Yeah, well, that is a really great question. I think that, well, I haven't returned yet to my country. I'm not planning to return yet because, well, the situation, particularly in my country, is today very difficult. But I guess that it's the experience of being immersed in this science background give me the possibility to see in current situations many new stories. Particularly, I think that's one of the highlights of the experience of being studying also in New York is that you are surrounded by this very kind of unique media outlet landscape. And I really think that particularly from the experience that we all have lived since the pandemic started, I have learned new ways of telling stories, just being very surprised by the way the New York media have covered it. And for example, if I have had the chance to compare how Chile and New York has been sort of covering the same story, well, this very big story, which is the pandemic. And for example, in Chile, the journalism hasn't covered stories in third person, for example, which personally has been something that I have been really amazed here when, for example, all the journalists started to not just be journalists, but also they started to be affected as person by the virus and started to share this experience in media. I guess that when I return to Chile, I will, in a way, I was very surprised about this kind of new gender for me, which is the testimonial journalism. I will never forget all the ways I have seen journalism, all the types of journalism I have seen and I have learned here, and probably I will try to reproduce that in my country.
Thank you so much.
About it. So I think we'll move over and introduce Gina Boubian, who is our Director of Career Development, and she'll talk a bit about the services that office provides all of our students and the different paths our graduates go on to do after they finish our program.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Really happy to see so many people on this call. I'm actually going to share a screen and mix it up here and show you some slides. But let me, so real quick, share screen. There it is. Okay. Okay. So I am a journalist, former journalist, and I'm on a team of journalists that compose the Office of Career Development at Columbia. And our team works really closely with students to help you make sure that you find a job or an internship after graduation. And our help includes one-on-one counseling, which Muriel and Lila both took advantage of. And we also bring in dozens and dozens of editors all year long for you to learn about the industry and meet with editors. We bring in alums. Alums are always really eager to talk to the new students about their experience and to be helpful to them. We also organize an enormous career expo every year. It is the largest career expo in the country, and last spring we had 230 editors and hiring managers representing 130 companies participate, and they conducted amongst them 2,300 interviews with students in the class of 2020. It was the first virtual expo that we've ever had, and we held it at the height of the pandemic in New York City at the end of April, end of March, beginning of April. And the pandemic didn't stop us from putting on a huge event, and it certainly didn't stop employers from wanting and needing to interview our students for jobs and internships. So what you're seeing here is some of the news companies that hired at least one student from the class of 2020. And in the Dropbox, John's going to put a link to a PDF, to a couple PDFs, one that lists all of the companies that attended the Career Expo, the virtual Career Expo in the spring, and the other is a list in list for the 112 companies that hired a student or at least one student from the class of 2020 in a list form that might be easier for you to read through and in your own time. So first, a reality check. There's no guarantee of a job after J School. We have no idea what the journalism job market will be like next year or in 2022. We don't know which companies will launch. I mean, the 19th launched in the middle of the pandemic. I mean, there a lot of good things are still happening in journalism, but we don't know which companies will have layoffs. We don't know which companies will have even a second round of layoffs. But one thing is a truism here at the J School, regardless of the flux in the journalism industry and the tumult in the national and regional economy, Columbia students do really well in the job market in the months after graduation, but most especially in the years after graduation and in the process of career building that happens, in the years after graduation. So I'm going to share with you some information from past graduating classes so that you can have a bigger picture of how our students do in the journalism industry and what these figures can tell us about journalism, the state of journalism in particular. And we're super blunt about our data. So I'm going to show you if you reduce my, you can see everything now. So at graduation, we send out a questionnaire and we ask students to tell us what their plans are after graduation. And we get 100% of the class reporting pretty much because of the timing of when we send out this questionnaire. If we were to wait many months after graduation, like some other schools do, we would not get 100% reporting. We've tried it and it has not been effective. So we take our data at graduation so that we can have the entire class in the data set. And it's important for you as you're looking at different grad schools, and I don't care what discipline you're looking at, you should be reporters and interrogate the data. You have a right to ask questions about how different schools collect their employment data. You should be asking how they collect their data, when they collect their data, and when they compile their data, and what percentage of the class is included in the data. So from 2011 to 2019, 71 to 71% of any given graduating class had plans lined up within a couple of weeks of graduation. And when I say plans, it's a broad range because our students are adults. You have many different visions and career goals. It includes jobs, it includes internships, it includes fellowships, it includes a small group of students who continue on to another academic degree. It includes students also who are embarking on a very deliberate freelance career by choice. So in 2020, yes, it was not a good scene. COVID was really bad for the job market, and our students didn't do as well. This was definitely a departure from the norm. Our international students, I want to just talk to you because I see there's a number of you on this call. Our international students, by and large, do as well as the U.S. citizens, green card holders in any given class. I mean, very, very close correlation. But it shouldn't surprise you that if you do come to Columbia, you will have to work harder. You'll have to apply to more jobs than anybody else. And this shouldn't surprise you that you will find yourself in this position. But if you do that, and if you avail yourself of everything that is at this school, then you'll do fine. And so, for instance, in 2018, the international students and the U.S. citizen students and the green card holders were within like less than 1% of each other by the end of the year. And last year, 2019, the international students were actually 80% employed at graduation compared to 75% employed for the US citizen green card holders. Okay, then the pandemic happened. This year was terrible, as I said, and it hurt everybody. It hurt the international students worse. The international students in the class of 2020 were only 56% employed at graduation compared to 64% for the international, for the US citizens. And so that's how we come up with an overall rate of 61%. But as I want to make clear, these numbers are as of like a week or two after graduation, and they tick up throughout the summer. Just this morning on Twitter, I saw a student saying, personal news, I'm going to Wyoming, I got a full-time job. And this is a student who came into the J School with no journalism experience. I was really, really happy for him. So the majority of these positions are internships and fellowships. And that's the next thing I want to talk to you about. When we talk about internships, we are talking about paid jobs in newsrooms that last from 10 weeks to 12 months. And these are paid jobs in newsrooms where you are pulling your weight as a journalist. They are not like internships that you may have done when you were in college, where maybe you had to bring coffee to somebody, maybe you had to go pick up somebody's groceries, you know, all these things that we hear, you know, from students when they get here, and expressing their horror over the word internship. It's different in American newsrooms with graduate students in play. Our students, you know, you're hired to pull your weight. You're hired to start contributing from day one. You are expected to be able to write at a certain level and start helping the news organization put out the newscast or put out the paper. So it's a big difference. So we actually love internships, and when internships are the sort of the norm and the biggest share of job categories for all groups: U.S. students, international, MS Stabile, and MAs, and also the MS data students. This is what most students are doing, and our message to you, if you get here, is like, don't be put off by that. In fact, we love internships. It is your way of going from J School directly to a big news organization. We have many students in the program who come into the school with maybe a few years experience at a very small paper or a very small station, and they really want to up their game and get to a much bigger place. And J School helps make that happen. But the first spot will be an internship in a bigger news organization. So we love internships. We talk about them a lot, and some of it is just educating students who aren't used to hearing such happy talk about internships, because we really, really like them. They turn into full-time jobs very, very typically. One other thing I want to say to the international students who are on this call. So international students are allowed to stay in the US after graduation for a year after graduation if you apply for something called optional practical training, and it's OPT for short, and many of you have probably already heard of it. And it's an extension of your student visa, and it's good for a year, and you can work anywhere in the country in journalism for that year. And after that year, you will most likely go home. I want to just make sure that it is abundantly clear that it is extremely uncommon, extremely rare for an international student to find a news company to sponsor them for a long-term work visa after that year is up. Okay, it is very, very unusual. So please be aware, when you come here, you're going to get that year experience in a U.S. newsroom, hopefully, and then you're going to leave the U.S. and go back to your country or somewhere else and get a great job. If you look on the LinkedIn site for the J School, you'll see where our alums are. They're all over the world, and they have the best jobs in the world. So business journalism, economics journalism, this is one of the categories where our international students have often found opportunity because of the high number of jobs in this field. And Mandarin language and Spanish language skills are also in very high demand in newsrooms everywhere in the United States. And we've seen students get sponsored who have those language fluencies as well. So let me show you another picture. So this is how all of these positions divide up by platform. And I apologize, it doesn't quite, I'm used to looking at this, but I know that like the type is very small and it isn't the best thing to show on Zoom. So I'm gonna have to walk you through it. I really apologize. But the red line is the digital only, the share of digital only positions. And we saw a big spike in this last year's class. Over 35% of all the journalism class jobs and internships were in digital only platforms. The blue line is the broadcast platform trajectory. That's video and audio, and the green line's newspapers and their online staff. And so the three of these platforms, digital, broadcast, and newspaper, account for 80% of all the journalism positions. And that has been the case for a while, if you can see this trajectory. And one of the things I love about this graphic is the green line of newspapers. You know, it bounces along, it kind of stays steady, even though everybody comes into the school saying, I hear newspapers are dying. And then, you know, this happens at the end of every year. There's definitely an increase in broadcast positions, and this is partly due to the explosion in audio and podcasting, which students get really excited about when they hear. And the other 20% of jobs and internships and fellowships are in magazines and wire services. The magazine line is the orange line, and the wire services is the purple line. The wire services, I'm talking about Bloomberg, Agence France Presse, the Associated Press, Reuters, what else is there? Wall Street Journal, Dow Jones, Newswires. And that, the purple line has been sort of a steady, lively, sort of small but lively sort of segment of jobs and internships for our students. And it did go down in 2020. And that is because we feel that AP didn't hire anybody from the class, and Reuters also suspended its internship program, and they usually hire several of our students, and it was enough to cause that drop in wire service jobs. And the magazine line, I just want to talk about it for the briefest second. It's been on the decline forever, and it shouldn't surprise you, and it's because magazines, as we all know, we're pretty slow to leap onto the internet wagon. It's hard to imagine, but 10 years ago, there were still, editors, feeling like, there will always be a market for print magazines, and there will always be people who want to curl up on their couch and read a magazine. That turned out not to be the case. And a lot of that same kind of writing, the voicey, long form narrative, it gravitated to digital only platforms like The Intercept, like the Marshall Project, like Jezebel. And so that's where those sort of long form writing positions and internships went. Okay. So altogether, let's see, what was I going to show you next? I'm so sorry. Okay. You can do this at home. Go on LinkedIn, and there's a Columbia Journalism School LinkedIn page, and you can click on the alumni button, and you can just search to your heart's content. You can type in any publication in any country of the world, any state in the United States, and see where our alums are. You can do this for any school that you're interested in. And this is just showing you sort of the concentration of J-School talent at the biggest brand names in the country. And that, that bottom line that I added, 9 students from the class of 2020 were hired at Report for America. This, I just want to, shout out to Report for America. This is a new 2-year fellowship started by our J-School alum, Charlie Sennett, who is, he's the editor of Ground Truth Project, and he started Report for America 3 or 4 years ago. And the purpose is to situate news journalists in underreported areas, newsrooms of the country, covering beats that have been that haven't been covered in a while. So we have students at the Baltimore Sun, at the Detroit News, at a lot of really, really great papers, and they've got fantastic beats, from environmental science to race and inclusion to the Asian community. And it's something that we're going to keep our eye on, and our students are definitely going to keep applying to that. So let me just briefly talk about pay, because it comes up. So journalism is, at the beginning years of journalism, it's not the best paid industry. The internships pay from $15 an hour, which is the minimum wage in New York City, and so that will be the low. But it's a range of like, $600 to $700, $800 a week, with a high of maybe $1,200 a week. That's like the high range of an internship pay. And it is a range. And the thing about internships is they're short term, they're temporary. Many of our students do segue from an internship into a full-time job, and at that point you get a big bump in pay. So that's what our students are aiming for, and that's what happens. And for full-time jobs, the pay range is really a low of 35, and then the range is sort of 35 to 65. But if you've got a lot of experience, if you're an editor, and you're in the business and economics MA concentration, or you're a Knight Bagehot fellow, and you get a full-time job at the BBC or or the New York Times or Business Insider, you're going to be getting paid a lot more than that. So it is definitely a big range. Okay, now I would like to just talk about some recent stories by alums that popped up in my news feed basically this week. And so I just wanted to walk you through some of these stories. Elizabeth Dwoskin was an MS grad who is now the Silicon Valley correspondent for the Washington Post. And she wrote this story that caught my eye a couple days ago in the Washington Post. And you know, her trajectory, you would have never guessed. She worked at the Village Voice after J School, which no longer exists. And then she got hired at Bloomberg, Village Voice to Bloomberg. How does that work? Well, she was just a really good long form investigative reporter. And then she went to Bloomberg Business Week, which is the magazine. And then she's at the Washington Post. This is Kio Herrera's big story on how social workers are really strapped and really at wit's end, responding to a cascade of disasters in Puerto Rico. And she did this piece as a package that was part of a package that was done by a bunch of our students on for the Centers for Public Integrity, and it was on how disasters have increased the mental health, or caused mental health crises. And so she was on that team, and this was a great story, and it went viral, and it was published in an investigative news website in Puerto Rico, which is very well regarded and wins a lot of awards. This story is this was on the New York Times op-ed page couple weeks ago by Erica Washington. The New York Times op-ed page is just about the most valuable real estate in journalism, and she published this story. And Erica was a teacher before Columbia. She was teaching public school in Indianapolis, or somewhere in Indiana where she went to college, and she became really disillusioned and disheartened by the quality of education that she was when she wasn't getting enough training, and she just left that AmeriCorps position really disillusioned, but also really impassioned and wanting to make a career as an investigative education reporter. And so she came to Columbia and focused on that. And after Columbia, she went to Hechinger Report, which is an education website based at Teachers College, very well respected. And then she got a full-time job covering K-12 education for the Austin American-Statesman. And she met the editor at the job fair in 2019, and he hired her after her internship finished at Hechinger. Then the pandemic happens and she gets laid off. This was about 5 months ago. She got laid off, and she wasted no time pitching great stories and getting some really high profile pieces published in newspapers and magazines. And she recently published one of those, some personal news items on Twitter. She just became Chalkbeat's new education reporter in Indianapolis. So full circle back to Indianapolis, as a state that she knows really well. This story came up in my Twitter, my phone yesterday, and I thought I would put it on here. Umair was a career switcher. He was a neuroscience major at University of Illinois a few years ago, and he was deciding between medical school and journalism school, and he did journalism school first and got hooked. His first job after J School was an internship at E&E, which is Environment and Energy, which is a newswire in Washington, D.C. that publishes Climate Wire and Green Wire. And that's where he was for a couple years. And he recently went to Vox to be their science and health reporter. And so he's done some really, really important work during the pandemic, as you can imagine. Okay, Adam Desiderio, 10 days ago, found out that he won not one, but 2 Emmys for documentaries at Vice. And Adam graduated a few years ago. The day they announced the Emmys, we were looking over the list of all the winners. There were 10 alums on the list of winners this year, on the list of winners for Emmys. 2 of them are executive producers of shows that won. One of them is the executive producer of CNN's The Situation Room with Wolf Blitzer, and the other one is the executive producer of PBS NewsHour. We have alums in really high places, and so that's what's in store for some of you. I have no doubt. Some of the other winners were former international students. One of them was an MA student, an MA politics student, I believe from Brazil. And so, you know, take a look. So this is really fun. I like to talk about trajectories that I've noticed from over the years. And this is just a brief sort of summary. We get a lot of students who are coming directly from undergrad, no gap. You know, you graduate in May and here you are in grad school the very next September. And so Julia was one. She went to college in Massachusetts and she did one summer internship at the Berkshire Eagle before graduation, after graduation from college, before she got to Columbia. And she hadn't had any other journalism experience. She came to Columbia, then she got hired at the LA Times, and then she got another internship in the fall of 2019 at CNN, and now she's in the New York Times Fellowship, the year-long fellowship. Brianna was a college student in Florida who had numerous internships and was super heavily involved in her student newspaper in college. One of her internships was Politico cybersecurity intern. Then she came to Columbia and she got a full-time job as a fact checker at the New Yorker, and she met the New Yorker at our expo that year. She sat down with Michael Luo and David Remnick, who attended the expo to talk to students. And then Shinhee was in college in Maine, and she was a history major without any journalism experience, except for the one research assistantship that she had the summer before she started J School at the Washington Post Beijing Bureau. Now she's at Columbia, and she is at Columbia Journalism Review for the year in a year-long fellowship. Okay, we also get career changers, which I've hinted at already. Erica was a career changer, a former teacher. Pranshu is now at the New York Times. He was working in city government. He was at the Philadelphia mayor's office. He was in the New York City mayor's office, and he came to Columbia, and he was hired back after Columbia to go to the Philadelphia Inquirer. They were welcomed the chance to have somebody who knew everybody inside of City Hall, and then he was hired as a City Hall reporter, and he did it for a year, and then he came back to New York for the New York Times Fellowship, and he's been super active on Twitter. You can follow him, Pranshu Verma. Lucas was a computer science systems guy from Stanford who coded after college and actually was extremely successful coding. And he decided that he hated it. He wanted to write. He came to the J School and he got a data journalism internship at iNewsSource, which is an investigative website in San Diego that's actually won awards. And he came to terms with his data and computer science skills and decided that, you know, he was okay using them to find great stories and improve his journalism. So that's what he is doing. After iNewsSource, he went to the Dallas Observer for a staff writing fellowship, and now he's at Report for America at this amazing new nonprofit investigative website in the state of West Virginia called Mountain State Spotlight. We've got a couple students there. The editors are former Pulitzer Prize winners, and there's a MacArthur Genius Award winner on the team. They're just this amazing small but mighty team cranking out investigative journalism about West Virginia. It just launched like literally like 3 weeks ago, and it's really worth checking out. They're doing really important stories for the state. Then Deanna, she was an attorney. She was a lawyer in Brooklyn, in the Kings County, Brooklyn assistant district attorney's office. And she came to Columbia. On a whim, she applies to the Washington Post, and they hired her without any journalism experiences because of her incredible legal experience that she had. And then, and she was there during the whole Harvey Weinstein trial. So she was, you know, on call to write all the legal stories on that. And then they hired her full time. And now she's covering courts. She's back in New York covering courts, Manhattan courts for the Journal. Next. And last, people come to, there's like Muriel, people with like several years of experience who come to the J School wanting to shift gears or specialize in something. So Sarah was, you know, she was working for her student newspaper at Berkeley, and then she just went abroad. She wanted to be a foreign correspondent, so she went abroad, and she became a fixer in Turkey for a lot of big news organizations, including BuzzFeed. And then she came to Columbia, and she became a graduate trainee, which is their sort of 9-month program to train people and hire them full time. And she's a correspondent for Reuters now. And this is, I see that I made a mistake. She's in Beirut right now, and she was there during that terrible explosion that they just had, and she had to report that story. Tuan was extremely focused on sports reporting. She's from California. She was on the Daily Bruin at UCLA, and she had 4 different internships in sports reporting. And so she's really into sports. So she came to Columbia, and she had 2 internship offers after graduation, but she decided to, at the last minute, the Athletic offered her a full-time job, and it was like a dream for her to be hired by the Athletic. So that's where she is. Daniel was in the Marine Corps. Then he went to a small paper called the Watertown Daily Times and worked there as a reporter for a few years. He did the Columbia MA business concentration, and he went from all that experience to an internship at Bloomberg. It was a calculation, and he was hired full-time, of course, and so that's where he is. Maggie was at the AV Club. Maggie was from Baltimore. She went to Johns Hopkins, and she was super outdoorsy, and it was relevant because in the job that she ended up getting. But you know, AV Club is like a dream for someone who wants to cover music, arts and culture. But she had changed her focus, and she came to the J School to get into radio. And she just got a year-long fellowship at Colorado Public Radio. It's a dream job, and she's just really, really excited about that. So that's all I had to share. If anybody has questions, John, I'm happy to answer. And let me stop sharing.
All right, thank you so much, Gina. We do have a few questions. One of the first ones was a logistical question about the data degree program. So it's technically a STEM program, and so students were wondering, does that qualify for 3 years of OPT?
Yes, you get a longer OPT. I'm not sure what the length is. I don't know if it's quite
24 months.
24 months, so 27 months? No, 24. It's longer than a year. Yes, it is.
Got it. Thank you so much. Students who are interested in the part-time wanted to know if there's any sort of, counseling or assistance that can help them segue into a journalism career while they're studying during their 2 years, or do the opportunities really only come at the Career Expo?
No. The part-time students, typically, they come to us early, and if they're looking for a job or internship, we absolutely help them. And by graduation, it seems like most of the part-timers are working in journalism. They've gotten some kind of position while at some point in their 2 years, and that's what they've got at graduation. And then after graduation, they either stay with that company, or they get a new job, or get a promotion. So it happens sort of in the 2 years. Yeah.
When students graduate, do you continue to assist them post-graduation throughout their years as a journalist?
Well, we are very hands-on for the several months after graduation. But we've got a lot of resources on our website that are always going to be available. You keep your Columbia email address forever, and that gives you access to all of our online tools, our job news tools, where we publish job postings and internship postings all the time. And we have a lot of online resources like how to refresh your memory on how to write a resume and how to do a cover letter and all kinds of stuff. And then the Facebook pages are also super lively. I mean, we still post jobs when we hear from an editor who's looking for somebody with a few years experience. We'll post it on job news going back on Facebook groups going back several years.
Got it. Thank you so much. The students that you were mentioning kind of in your snapshots of students and their trajectory, were the bulk of those students MS students? I know you mentioned specifically a couple of MA, but can you kind of speak to the different populations and their success rate post-graduation?
The MAs, no, there weren't enough MAs in my sample. It's true, but I mean that's because it's a much smaller group than the MS students. The MA students have really great jobs out there, but they are on sort of a different trajectory, because the MAs are looking for they're looking for full-time jobs. And even with this group, we will tell them, hey, don't forget about certain internships and certain fellowship programs. Don't turn your nose up. They're worth considering. But some of them will wait, a few months after it'll take them a while to find something after graduation. I was just on the Deseret News website, and I saw 2 MAs who were writing for them. The Deseret News is this little sleeper newspaper in Salt Lake City, which is incredibly high quality because the editor is our grad, Jesse Hyde, who was an award-winning magazine writer and alternative weekly writer before he returned to Deseret. And he hired 2 students out of last year's class, Maya Jaradat and Robert O'Connell, and he lets them do whatever they want. Maya's covering religion for them, and Robert does whatever he wants, sports, politics, what have you. So it's just one of these little jewels. There's many jewels out there in the journalism world, and they're there sort of doing long form journalism. So anyway, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, absolutely. And then finally, just, in preparation for the Career Expo and meeting all of these recruiters, what are some of the things, one of the benefits of the program is that it's very professional in nature. They're going to be developing a lot of clips and gaining a lot of things that are very tangible, real things to present to people. What are some things that people can do to prepare themselves for certain industries, whether it's broadcast or audio? Should they come to the Expo with kind of audio and visual samples ready to go to show people? How can they better prepare themselves?
Editors, first of all, Elena Cabral mentioned earlier that students get a lot. You can get training in a lot of different areas, but the bread and butter of this school is reporting and writing. It just is, and so most of our students do get jobs doing reporting and writing, regardless of platform. Okay, but at the Expo, it's very typical to share your work with an editor. For those of you who work on multimedia or video, to open up your laptop or share a screen and show them something that you've done, or put on headphones and have them listen to something that you've created on a podcast. So that's kind of how it goes. It's talking to an editor about your work, what you've learned, and what you're doing. And one thing I want to make clear about publishing, the students, the U.S. citizens, green card holders can pitch their stories that they write in class to any publication that they want, and some of them do. It's not the norm. It's really actually not so critical that you get published while you're at J school, but some students do take advantage of that. The international students are not allowed to write for U.S.-based news organizations that pay. It's not permitted on your visa. It's illegal, and so you don't have that available to you pitching to outside news organizations. However, there is a website, a new site called Columbia News Service, and it is sort of being beefed up and revived and beefed up this year. And this is so that everybody has a chance to pitch stories and get their work out there and picked up by newspapers and news organizations throughout the country. And the editor is Bill Gruskin, who is one of the very best editors in the business. He's a former Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg editor and Miami Herald editor. So there will be chances to get published, but it's not the norm. It's more important that you just learn as much as you can here and write as much as you can here. And if something gets published along the way, then great.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Gina. That is it for the questions. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Do we have any other questions that we're going to touch on right now?
If we're doing kind of like an open forum, I'm just going to answer just a few that were brought up. Or are we still on the career services end? I'm so sorry.
I think we can move on. And Gina, I don't know if you'll be able to stay a little bit longer. There may be some other questions that come up as people listen and think about different
sure,
options
no
and possibilities. Thank you.
Wonderful to talk to everybody. I'll hang out.
Thanks, Gina.
Awesome.
Okay, John, let's take another maybe 5 minutes or so.
Sure. I just want to answer a few questions that were coming up routinely and just make sure everyone is, in the know about all of this. So, you can definitely apply for a specialization, but we also consider all of our students who are applying to, Stabile or DOC for the MS program as well. So if it's something that we feel that you'd be a better fit for the comprehensive Master of Science program, we'll make that decision and it'll be on your admissions, it'll be on the admissions letter. So that's not something that you need to actually indicate. If you are applying for the Master of Arts program and you'd like to be considered for the Master of Science program, that is something that you'll need to indicate on your application. And so at that point, we will look at your application. If you have checked that box and have submitted the writing test, which is the only additional requirement for the MS that an MA applicant would need to submit who wants to be considered for that, then we will assess if you'd be a better fit for the Master of Science program. So I just want to, let everyone know we take a very holistic look at all of the applications. We have shifted people from the MS to the MA who have an abundance of experience who we feel would be a good fit. So we really take a close look at everyone's application to make sure that they are in the best program for them. So that's something that we will look at throughout the committee and application process. A lot of students had questions about scholarships. Definitely attend more of our information sessions because we're not going to get into the nitty-gritty of that. But I just want to let you know that we encourage all of our students to submit the scholarship application. We extend scholarships to both domestic and international students. We don't differentiate between the two populations. There are funds that exist for both. We award on a combination of need and merit, but we can't award anything without the scholarship application. So if you want to be considered for any funding at Columbia, you definitely have to submit that. We'll notify all of you via email as soon as that becomes available.
John, you might also mention the scholarship spreadsheet, the outside third-party scholarships that we have on the website.
Definitely visit our website, visit the financial aid portion and the scholarship area, because we also have a lot of outside scholarships that we have on like a really amazing table that Edwin created that you can search by characteristic, demographic, things like that. And we encourage all of our students who are really taking this seriously, all of our prospective students who are taking graduate school seriously, to really think about, and apply to as many outside sources as you can, because, everything helps no matter how small it is. So definitely doing, having an organized spreadsheet of different scholarships with their deadlines, that you would be qualified for is definitely a great way to prepare and to ensure that you have the means to be able to do this should you be admitted. And then Ross and I have been dropping in links throughout with different webinars that are coming up. We have a documentary webinar coming up. We have a data degree webinar coming up. Let me just go through the list right now. One moment. So the documentary, actually, let me go through Stabile first, because a lot of people were asking about this Stabile. So on October 5th, actually on Monday, we'll have our Stabile event, so you can definitely come to that. That will be at noon, correct? Yes. And then throughout the rest of the month, let me double check. And Ross, correct me if I'm wrong. On Monday, October 26th at noon, we're going to be having our documentary webinar.
That's correct. Yep, I put in a link for everyone that has a menu of everything from now until December that's scheduled so far. We have quite a lot of virtual events ready to go. So you can click on any of those and register in advance for all the things we're offering. And you can go to as many as you like.
Excellent, thank you, Ross. So yeah, that link he just dropped in there has our entire schedule for the full fall semester. So we definitely encourage you to attend the more specific webinars that will really get into the nitty-gritty of the application process, scholarships, and then really the fine details of the different programs that we have. So there's like we're a little bit over time, but if there are any other pressing questions that people want to enter the chat, we can take a few more minutes to answer some of those that are more general in nature, so that we can really address them to the public and really give people key information that we feel is necessary. We don't have a GPA requirement. We also don't need the GRE. So that's not something that you should worry about. Students have, expressed concern about certain grades, and we've let them know that there's a portion on the application where they can state, I went through something personal, or I started off, in the wrong field for me, so my grades aren't so hot this semester. We're really looking at your clips, your essays, the passion that you exhibit in your application for journalism, the experience that you have for an MA application. That's really what we're looking at. We look at grades, and if there are certain writing or journalism classes that you did very poorly in, that might give us some pause. But overall, we're really looking at a very holistic snapshot of your application. We're really looking at your clips, your writing ability, and the passion you express for journalism. So I wouldn't get bogged down in the fine details of grades or anything like that. We don't really announce, acceptance rates for our various programs, but I would say like on average, it's about a 30% acceptance rate, mainly because we have a pretty lengthy application. So if people actually complete the application, these are really committed and passionate people. So we're very lucky that we review a very, very high quality application pool. We will be hosting some online classes. We are still working out which classes are going to be able to invite students to attend via Zoom. This semester we have a hybrid curriculum, so some classes meet online, some classes meet in person, or they divide from week to week. But we will be inviting students to participate via Zoom. Definitely submit an email to the apply.journalism@columbia.edu email. I'll put it in the chat for everyone as well, but you can definitely reach out to us and we'll let you know as soon as the faculty let us know when they'll be inviting people to participate in Zoom classes. And all right, I think that we have wrapped up all of the different questions that we have from everyone. If anyone has anyone else, please submit it in the chat. But I think that we're pretty good.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody. Again, we know that you've joined us from all over the United States and all over the world. We really appreciate your taking the time to join us, to talk with us, to think about the programs that we offer at the Journalism School. And again, please feel absolutely free to get in touch with us. For the most part, we are still working from home. However, email us, you can call us, we can schedule Zoom appointments with you to spend a little bit more time talking about your particular interests or personal questions. And we're also very happy to talk with you about financial planning for graduate school. Really any kinds of questions that you might have, we'll be happy to help you. All righty. Thanks so much for joining us.
One last thing, everyone, I am dropping in the link to our 15-week seminar and production course because I've been getting a lot of specific questions about covering religion, covering education, migration. This is it's a list of past 15-week seminar and production courses, and you can see really the expansive list that we have and the various different options that you can choose from and the levels of expertise that you can really focus in. And so I just wanted you to be able to take a look at that to kind of see past classes that we offered. We offer many of these things on a routine basis. So that'll just give you an idea of some of these awesome courses that we have to choose from. So sorry, I just wanted to make sure everyone saw that before we parted ways, but thank you so much. And thanks, Christine.
Thanks, John.
All right.
Alrighty.
Have a
Bye
nice
now.
day. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us.